Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, youth groups, women activists, one and all. It is with great joy and pleasure that I deliver this keynote at this DMZ forum titled Beyond Division to Peace and Cooperation. The theme of this gathering is a befitting title, especially in a world polarized and divided on many fronts. Religious, ethnic, racial, and ideological divisions continuously destroy our world's very fabric and are causing hardship and pain for many people around the globe. The world is in dire need of peace, justice, and sustainable development. Every day, there are calls for cessation of aversions from Africa to Asia to Europe, from America to the Arab world. Women and children in all scenarios bear the greatest brunt of divisions and crises. For many years, I have dedicated my life to the fight for peace and gender equality. My work has taken me to many places in the world. In all of these spaces and places, though the context may be different, the pain, hopelessness, and agony caused by war are the same. Young people in conflict-ridden areas find it increasingly difficult to visualize a future for themselves. In Libya, a few years ago, a group of young people told me that they could not even imagine their lives 30 minutes from the time we had gathered. During our debrief session at the end of the trip, we stressed to our partners that the armed groups in Libya would dramatically multiply if the international community continued to ignore the security context. 4 to 5 years later, the situation has evolved to exactly as we predicted. The number of armed groups in Libya has progressed immensely. In November of 2013, I was invited to Busan, South Korea for the World Council of Churches event. My time in Busan uniquely exposed me to the human side of the Korean conflict. Before my intimate exposure, my limited understanding of the conflict was informed primarily by westernized political analysis and militarized discussions. I bless God for sending 2 young people my way who made the political personal. When we met, they told me about the Korean conflict and how it led to the separation of them and their great-grandparents. They willed that they were holding on, some of their grandparents were holding on tight to life and hoped to be reunited with their family members one day. I could not help but ask more questions about the tragic nature of their separation from their great-grandparents. And the more questions I asked, the more emotional I became. You see, as a survivor of war, I could relate all too well to how human-made conflicts are readily victorious in separating people from their loved ones. The emotional toll of not knowing when and where you will see your family members is unfathomable. 2 years after Busan, on the 60th anniversary of the division of the Korean Peninsula, I joined a group of 30 women leaders from 12 countries for an unprecedented peace walk across the demilitarized zone that separates North and South Korea. The peace walk called for many things. Prominent among them was an end to the Korean War by replacing the 1953 Peace Armistice Agreement with a permanent peace treaty between the warring countries. 5 years after the peace walk, I have made a list of a few reasons why I courageously walk in solidarity with the women and men of North and South Korea who yearn for reconciliation and reuniting of their families. 1. The most obtrusive of all is my experience working with the women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace. In 2003, a group of us Liberian women started a nonviolent protest, which greatly contributed to ending Liberia's 14-year civil war that killed 250,000 people, forced 500,000 out of their country, and made about 1 million internally displaced within the borders of Liberia. The Women of Liberia Peace Movement taught me that when women raise their voices, even in the darkest moments, dynamics tend to shift. The second reason is my admiration for the power of women's leadership in peace-building processes. In all of my participation in peace negotiations over the past 15 years, I have seen firsthand that when women gather for peace, you see less of the politics of egos and power play. When women gather for peace, we create lasting change by reminding people of war's cruelty. Most importantly, we intentionally place those directly affected by conflict in the center of the resolution process instead of treating them as abstract. Last but not least, women's drive, commitment, and tenacity inarguably create lasting peace in intense conflict contexts. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's been almost 70 years since the Korean War ended in an armistice agreement that brought about a complete cessation of hostilities and called for the signing of a permanent peace agreement. Although the armistice succeeded in stopping shooting at the 38th parallel for nearly 70 years now, which is by far the most densely militarized area on Earth, the reality is a ceasefire agreement is not the same as permanent peace treaty between both parties. To this day, the 30th parallel constitutes a festering sore on the face of the peninsula, leaving both sides ever on alert with suspicion and fear. This unresolved conflict has caused the separation of over 10 million families with absolutely no glimpse of reunification. I have been told that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different result. My own country, Liberia, for 14 years was a true definition of insanity in its quest for peace and stability. Attempts to resolve Liberia's civil conflict saw over 24 peace conferences, over a dozen peace agreements, and many political pledges and commitments. None of those concerted efforts ever brought about the peace that Liberians yearn for, until Liberia's women launched a mass action for peace. In my firmest belief, the campaign changed the trajectory of the peace process. It moved the conversation from barriers to cooperation. It redirected the theme from militarism to people and the impact the war placed on their livelihood. For years, the Korean War has been centered around not just the North and South, but also a hegemon of those who are overly invested in the politics and benefits of the war at the expense of the poor civilians. Your Excellencies, no nation on the face of this earth can fully embrace peace if the conversation is void of civilians, their daily realities and future, and is solely focused on weaponization and politics. Some may argue that this is a simplistic view to end one of the most protracted and polarized conflicts. Still, I say to them, political conversations alone can never break down barriers. Whilst it is true that politics is one of the elements in breaking down barriers, the involvement of people, their needs and aspirations should be at the center of every discussion surrounding peace. For over half a century, the Korean leaders on both sides, North and South, have failed to integrate the people's call to demolish the barrier. Your Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for the Korean people to experience absolute peace and cooperation, permit me to kindly proffer the following recommendations. Engage in a Korean-only peace dialogue void of external parties. Administer the signing of a peace agreement that will officially end the Korean War. Engage in an inter-Korean cooperation through economic and cultural activities. Build trust and engage instead of isolation. Facilitate the reunion of divided families. In 2015, we made the journey to Pyongyang and to Seoul. The trip happened after months of planning and many conversations. I was glad to have formed a part of the group of women that made that historic trip. At the end, we walked the DMZ. We made it to South Korea amidst loud cheers and some boos, but it was worth it. The question one may ask, did we achieve peace? My answer is a resounding yes. You see, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, peace is not just about any war. Peace is about the creation of conditions that dignifies all people. On our visit to both the North and South, we had the opportunity to sit, to listen to each other's stories. We had moments to embrace and to share meals. We spent days dignifying each other's humanity. We broke down barriers and gave hope to those who had lost all hope. To sum it all up, we moved beyond barriers and took a few steps closer to cooperation and peace. My prayer is that this will happen once and for all for the people of North and South Korea. I thank you.